Hello students, welcome to this English video lesson. Today I will be teaching you Kushwant Singh's biographical narrative, The Portrait of a Lady. This is an interesting narrative by the author. I hope you will enjoy this piece of prose. This prose piece is found in Unit 1 of your textbook, and as you listen, be sure to learn as many new words as possible. Now let's take a quick look at Kushwant Singh's background. He is an interesting personality and he is one of the most acclaimed literary figures. Kushwant Singh is one of India's best known novelists. He is also a humorist, journalist, diplomat, and lawyer. He produced some of the most admired English language fiction and non-fiction in India. For many years, he was the editor of the journal The Illustrated Weekly of India. He received the Punjab Pradhan Award in 2006 and he was also honored in 2007 with Padma Vibhushan, the second highest civilian award in India. This shows he is one of the most celebrated writers in Indian writing in English. He is known for his keen sense of humor, secularism, sarcasm, and love for poetry. He had an uncanny knack of bringing out profound truth using a vivid and simple language. His works are often regarded as social satire. Train to Pakistan is one of his brilliant works. It is a historical novel which captures the events surrounding the partition of India after the British rule. In 2007, he published the book The Portrait of a Lady, Collected Stories. This volume contains the prescribed text, The Portrait of a Lady. This is the prescribed prose piece for our first unit. But before we begin, let me ask you a simple question. What comes to your mind when you think of your grandparents? Maybe their kindness, love, rebukes, and stories. Now take a quick look at the pictures which are displayed on your TV screen. What do you see? You can see everything that grandparents do for their grandchildren. They feed their grandchildren, tell stories, buy gifts, and play games with them. How many of you have experiences like this? Think about it. It is said that having grandparents around is always good for you. According to a study at Boston College in America, an emotionally close relationship between grandparents and grandchildren is associated with a stress-free lifestyle for both generations. So, if you have grandparents, make sure that you spend time with them. With that being said, we shall now return to what Kushwant Singh has to say about his grandmother in his biographical narrative, The Portrait of a Lady. The word portrait may mean a photograph or a detailed description of someone. And in this story, the author gives a detailed description of his grandmother. His grandmother was from a village and she was a devout lady. The author had a strong emotional bond and intimate relationship with her. He begins the story by saying that just like all grandmothers, his grandmother was also old. And it was hard for him to believe she once had a husband. Kushwant Singh had never seen his grandfather in person. He had seen his grandfather only in a portrait which hung above the mantelpiece. As you can see in this picture, a mantelpiece is a shelf projecting from the wall above a fireplace. In the portrait, he could see his grandfather wearing a big turban and loose-fitting clothes. He had a long white beard. He looked like a 100-year-old man who had lots of grandchildren. The author's grandmother often talked about the games she used to play as a child. But he found it absurd and took it for one of her fables. Now look at the picture and learn the meanings of the words absurd and fable. Have you understood the meaning of the words absurd and fable? Absurd means illogical. It doesn't seem logical to the author that such an old lady could have played any game as a child. So the author and his siblings thought that their grandmother was just telling them stories to amuse them. Then the author proceeds to describe his grandmother's appearance. She was short, fat, and slightly bent. She hobbled around the house wearing a spotless white dress. How does your grandmother look like? His grandmother had a peculiar way of hobbling around. The word hobble means walking unsteadily. You can see it in the picture displayed on your screen. As his grandmother was very old, she walked unsteadily with one hand resting on her waist to balance her stoop. And in her other hand, she always carried a rosary. Have you ever seen a rosary? A rosary is a string of beads used in prayer. Her lips always kept moving in inaudible prayer. She was a pious woman who always spent her time in prayer. The grandmother's grey hair were scattered untidily over her pale, puckered face. In other words, her face was full of wrinkles. As you can see in this picture, wrinkles are the lines and folds in the skin of old people. Though the grandmother was old, she was beautiful. She looked like a beautiful winter landscape in the mountains. And with her grey hair scattered over her face, she looked like an expanse of pure white serenity. An expanse is a wide area of land, water, or sky. The grandmother was just as peaceful to look at as one would look at a snow-covered mountain. The author and his grandmother were good friends. She became his caretaker when his parents moved to the city, and they were constantly together. Every morning, she used to wake him up and get him ready for school. While she bathed and dressed him, she said her morning prayer in a monotonous sing-song. She always said the prayer in an unchanging, boring tone. She hoped that by listening to her song, her grandson would learn it by heart. But the author never cared enough to learn it. Then the grandmother would tie up the wooden slate, chalk, earthen ink pot, and red pen in a bundle to be carried to school. She also took several stale chapatis with her for the stray dogs. The author's grandmother always went to school with him because the school was attached to the temple. There, the alphabet and the morning prayer were taught by the priest to the students. The grandmother sat inside the temple and read the scriptures. When the school was over, they were followed by the village dogs on their way back home. The grandmother threw chapatis to those stray dogs. They were growling and fighting with each other for the chapatis. Then came a turning point in their friendship. The author's parents sent for them to live in the city. This time, the grandmother wasn't able to go to school with her grandson because he went to an English school in a bus. In the city, there were no dogs in the street. So the grandmother started feeding the sparrows in the courtyard of the city house. Every day, when the author came back from school, the grandmother asked him what the teacher had taught him. When he told her about the English words, Western science, law of gravity, and Archimedes' principle, the grandmother became unhappy. She was worried that her grandson was not taught about God and the scriptures. Also, she did not like the music lessons that were given to him. When the author went to the university, he was given a separate room. This snapped their friendship. Snapped here means broken. In other words, it broke their close relationship. Anyway, the grandmother accepted her seclusion with resignation. Have you ever heard of the word seclusion before? It means isolation or separation or loneliness. Though it was difficult for the grandmother to live in isolation, she seemed to have accepted it. From that day onwards, she sat by her spinning wheel from sunrise to sunset. She kept reciting her prayers and rarely talked to anyone. She only relaxed for half an hour in the afternoon to feed the sparrows. Every afternoon, hundreds of sparrows gathered around her, creating a bedlam of chirruping. The phrase bedlam of chirruping refers to the noisy confusion made by the chirping of the birds. Kushwant Singh's grandmother too enjoyed her time with the sparrows. Some sparrows even perched on her shoulders. Perched here means sat. Some sat on her legs and some even on her head. The grandmother never shooed them away. It was the happiest time of the day for the grandmother. After completing his university education, the author decided to go abroad for further studies. He thought that he would not see his grandmother again. But his grandmother thought differently. She was sure that she would see her grandson again. So she wasn't even sentimental. She even came to see him off at the railway station. But she did not talk and her lips moved in prayer. She kissed him, leaving a moist imprint of her lips on his forehead. The author cherished it because he thought that it was the last sign of physical contact between them. But when the author returned home after 5 years, his grandmother met him at the railway station. She clasped him in her arms, but she did not talk and her mind was lost in prayer. Even on the first day of his arrival, the grandmother's happiest moments were with her sparrows. And she fed them for an unusually longer time with frivolous rebukes. Rebukes here means scoldings. Having fun with the sparrows, the grandmother amusingly scolded them. That evening, a change came over her. For the first time in her life, she did not pray. She gathered the women of her neighborhood. Then she took an old drum and started singing. The grandmother sang of the homecoming of the warriors to celebrate the arrival of her grandson. For many hours, she kept thumping on the dilapidated drum. As you can see on the TV screen, dilapidated means damaged, and everyone in the household tried to stop her from overstraining. But she did not pay any attention to them. The next morning, the grandmother fell ill. She had a mild fever. The doctor said that she would recover soon, but the grandmother told them that she was going to die. Because she hadn't prayed during the last few hours of her life, she wanted to pray without wasting any more time talking to them. She lay peacefully in her bed. She was praying and counting the beads of her rosary. When no one was expecting, her lips stopped moving and the rosary fell from her lifeless fingers. She was dead and a peaceful pallor spread on her face. As you can see in this picture, pallor is an unhealthy, pale appearance of the skin. Then they lifted her off the bed and lay her on the ground. As was their customary practice, they covered her body with a red shroud. A shroud is a cloth used to wrap a dead person. After mourning for a few hours, they started making arrangements for her funeral. Thousands of sparrows gathered around her body and sat scattered on the floor. Strangely enough, there was no chirruping of the sparrows. Even the sparrows seemed to mourn her death. Feeling sorry for the birds, the author's mother broke bread into little crumbs and threw them to the sparrows. But the sparrows did not eat any of it. When the body was carried away, the birds flew away quietly. The next morning, the sweeper swept the crumbs and put them into the dustbin. This story is not just about the grandmother. If it were so, the story would have ended with the grandmother's death. But the story is continued to show the empathy of the sparrows. The mourning sparrows showed empathy by not eating the breadcrumbs thrown to them. The author seems to wonder whether animals sometimes show more empathy than human beings themselves. Now it's time to do a quick recap of what we have learned so far. The author had a close friendship with his grandmother during his childhood days. But the friendship between them was snapped when the author got a separate room of his own. Then, when he returned home from abroad, the grandmother sang a song of the homecoming of the warriors. The next day, the grandmother fell ill and passed away. Now try to answer the questions that come up on your TV screen. Describe the grandfather as seen in the portrait. Can you think of an answer for this? Okay, let me tell you the answer. The grandfather wore a big turban and loose-fitting clothes. He had a long, white beard. He looked like a 100-year-old man who had lots of grandchildren. Okay, let's move on to the next question. Describe the author's grandmother. The grandmother was short, fat, and slightly bent. Her face was full of wrinkles, with her gray hair scattered all over it. She looked like the beautiful snow-covered mountains. Okay, why did the grandmother accompany the author to school? She accompanied him because the school was attached to the temple, and she could spend hours in reading the scriptures at the temple. What made the dogs follow the grandmother after school hours? The dogs followed the grandmother because she threw chapatis for them when returning home. The stray dogs were growling and fighting with each other for the chapatis. What was the happiest time of the day for the grandmother? Every afternoon, the grandmother sat in the veranda and broke bread into little crumbs to feed the sparrows. Hundreds of sparrows gathered around her, creating a bedlam of chirruping. This was the happiest time of the day for the grandmother. Okay, now we have come to the last question. How did the grandmother spend the last few hours of her life? During her last few hours, the grandmother did not waste any time talking to her family. She lay peacefully in bed, praying and counting the beads of her rosary. Let us now recollect some important words that you have come across in the text. The first word is absurd. It means illogical. For example, it is absurd to argue about the events of the past that are irrelevant. The next word, fables, means tales or stories. Aesop's fables are very interesting to read. Okay, now let's move on to the next word. Hobbled. Hobbled means walking unsteadily. For example, after the accident, Sudan hobbled to the hospital. The next important word is puckered. It means wrinkled. For example, the grandmother's face was full of wrinkles. The next word, monotonous, means unchanging. School children often recite the multiplication table in a monotonous manner. The next word, snapped, means broke. For example, both countries snapped their diplomatic relations as the talks failed. Let's move on to the next word, seclusion. It means isolation. For example, sages often prefer to live in seclusion. The next word is bedlam. It means noisy confusion. The sudden explosion in the factory resulted in a bedlam. The next word you have encountered is perched. Perch means sat. For example, the birds of the air often perched on our neem tree. Okay, let's move on to the next word, rebukes. It means scoldings. There was a strong rebuke from my parents for my poor performance in English. And the last important word is dilapidated. It means damaged. The old building in our village is in a dilapidated condition. Now turn with me to page 5. We shall learn how to do the textual exercises given in the third section of this page. Let's learn how to answer these questions in a paragraph. Okay, now let's look at the first question. The grandmother played a vital role in the author's formative years. Do you know what this means? The grandmother had an important role to play during the childhood of the author. Okay, now you can give your own example of how elders had a positive influence on your childhood days. You can include examples from your own story. Okay, now let's move on to the next question. As young Kushwant Singh, write a letter to your parents describing your daily routine, expressing your thoughts and feelings about staying in the village. So imagine yourself as the author and try writing a letter to your parents. Describing the daily routine you had with your grandparents. Okay, the final question. Animals are capable of empathy. Substantiate this statement with examples from the story as well as your own experiences. Do you know what empathy means? It means understanding and entering into another's feelings. So you can substantiate this statement including examples from your own story and your own experiences. Okay, students, that's it for now. You can always do the exercises that are given at the back of your textbook. Do write them and make sure that you get it corrected from your teachers. Hope you have enjoyed today's lesson. Keep tuning in for more lessons like this. Thank you.